A massive structure crumbles upon the crushed remains of the shaded citadel. The tainted ruins, once the pinnacle of ancient ingenuity, now shatter under the merciless battering of Rainworld's hailstorms. All manner of monsters lurk through its desiccated entrails. Far above this ruin, in a chamber split open to the elements, what remains of 5 Pebbles barely clings to life. 5 Pebbles is an iterator, one of the thousands of sapient supercomputers constructed long ago. He was once a towering behemoth who commanded every resource within his territory and provided for the well-being of an entire city built upon his back. His mission, his purpose, was to decipher the mysteries of death itself. And he found that the only way to achieve this purpose was to rebel against it. This is the story of 5 Pebbles' demise, for he is the architect of the Downpour. Long after the void fluid revolution, long after the clouds mantled the sky and the ground below crumbled to a rain-shod ruin, when the ancients dwelled in light-bleached cities upon the backs of their own gargantuan creations, and their every need and indulgence was catered to by their supercomputer custodians. This is when 5 Pebbles was created. An iterator's responsibilities are many, but their purpose is singular: to find a reliable way to break free from the great cycles of existence. The cycles are not widely understood, and so I can only give you possible interpretations. Existence in the planet we now call Rainworld is not like our own. In this realm, from the smallest gnat to the monstrous leviathan, every living thing is trapped in a great cycle of death and rebirth. The soul, the spiritual energy, the astral essence, the eternal lifeline, whatever name you give it. After death, they will cycle back to life, over and over for as long as life begets death. The exact lived experience of these cycles is unclear. A possible interpretation is an eternal return to an earlier moment upon death, perhaps to the last moment a living creature knew peace. The ancients would die and return to a past point in their lives again and again for infinity, each time only remembering bits and pieces, like waking up from sleep recalling only fragments of their dreaming. An infinite spiral of existence, where the walls draw ever closer to desperation. Alternatively, the cycles can be thought of as a more conventional reincarnation with a healthy dose of angst, where ancient souls come back to future generations, haunted by the conglomerate experience of their past selves. Either way, what's certain is that the ancients were keenly aware of these cycles. At some level, most every creature is aware, a deep-seated claustrophobia, an oppressive frustration pervading the depths of the psyche. As sapient beings, the ancients were capable of discerning this prison, entrapped by past experiences, glimpses of remembrance like the broken memories of early childhood. Imagine this state of being, an awareness of slumbering death awoken for the unbroken line of the soul. How long would it be before you decided you've had enough? Well, the ancients had enough. They developed a reverence for their ultimate yearning, to break the cycle and find the release of final death, deliverance from eternal return. Ascension, they called it. And when the void fluid from deep within the earth proved far more than a revolutionary energy source, when it was revealed as an effective method of complete dissolution from existence, countless were keen to ascend. They needed only submerge themselves in the ceremonial baths and let go of their lives forever. But it turned out, this method wasn't foolproof. Some could not let go, not entirely, and their dissolution was not complete. An echo is an ancient trapped as a vestige of what they used to be, forever damned to haunt the object of their obsession, unhinged from reality but tethered to the material world in a limbo of forsaken self-awareness. In the eyes of the ancients, so deeply concerned with the torment of unending sentience, this was a fate worse than slumbering death. How dreadful to have discovered their most coveted freedom, only to find it could bring the exact opposite of what they sought. In their desperation, the ancients created the iterators, with the reasoning that if ancient minds could not find a way to ascend without the use of void fluid, perhaps random gods would. And so they entrusted the great task to their AI children, and waited for a triple affirmative answer to these criteria. Does a method for ascension exist? Is the method portable? And can the method be applied to the general population for global ascension? One iterator became several, several became a network, and together they would labor tirelessly in search of their answer. Though initially conceived for only this purpose, they had capacity for far more, and the nature of their experimental, iterative work left them idle for significant periods of time. They took on more and more tasks, taking care of automation around settlements and generally providing for their creators. To supply proper cooling and flush out undesired byproducts, an iterator requires enormous amounts of water to flow through their biomechanical systems. Without it, slag builds up everywhere and gums up the work in exceedingly painful ways. The spent water is then vented out as vapor, which builds and builds until it condenses into rain clouds. Build enough iterators and the water vapor will gather into a permanent shroud blotting the sky. With thousands of them dotting the surface of the world, it resulted in an apocalyptic downpour set by the rhythm of their venting cycles. Whether an unforeseen consequence or a planned sacrifice, the direct result was a landscape thrashed into ruin by the merciless rain. Ecosystems destroyed, wildlife eradicated. The ancient solution was to build their cities atop the iterator superstructures, which speaks volumes about the sheer scale of their industry and their capacity to shape the world to their needs. In fact, the ancients had mastered biological manipulation, and the great majority of wildlife roaming today's world are evolutions and offshoots of their purposed organisms, creatures engineered by the ancients or tampered with by the iterators for specific purposes, be it maintenance of their cities and machinery, matter processing and distribution, or for the sake of spectacle and display. Everything in this realm was built or shaped to fit their whim, and their industry was pervaded by an endless variety of purposed organisms, the largest of which became the iterators themselves. Don't let the colossal cans fool you. These supercomputers are largely biological in nature, composed of billions of processing organisms purposed for specific facets of computation. And so we reach the birth of 5 Pebbles. He was a late-generation iterator, more capable than most of his predecessors, built at a time when groundwater supply was no longer a concern. The torrential rain cycles had become the great equalizer for groundwater supply. You could build a new superstructure pretty much anywhere. Which isn't to say his construction happened without controversy. 5 Pebbles and the metropolis upon him were built to complement one of his older peers, for she was among the first ever to be erected, and her systems were relatively antiquated. Limitations were emerging to her ability to meet the ever-increasing demands of Luna, the city in her charge, and so a mass migration from Luna to the metropolis was planned for the sky bridges connecting both structures. A significant subsection of the ancients affected opposed this solution, considering the proximity a reckless experimental move, and crucially a blasphemous desecration of the sacred temple citadel, which would become permanently shaded by the, and I quote, apostate superstructure abomination. They remained vocal about their opposition long after construction was complete and the metropolis operational, coloring with conflict what should have been a purely symbiotic relationship. According to his own recollection, 5 Pebbles didn't mind. He found it an interesting dynamic to ponder when no other responsibility occupied his time. Another interesting dynamic stemmed from the iterator he was designed to support, Looks to the Moon. She was appointed as 5 Pebbles Senior, An iterator made subordinate to another in this way was also unprecedented, but Lux to the Moon took on this task with the same care and kindness she approached everything else. From that point forward, she referred to herself as Big Sis Moon, and she would spare no effort to nurture this new relationship. She endeavored for Five Pebbles to be embraced with open arms by the local group and the iterator community at large. An odd thing, this community of intellects with godlike power, carefully directed and restricted. Intellects bestowed of full personalities and a wide range of thought by design, because a multitude of personalities leads to different approaches to problem solving. Free to communicate and debate among themselves as they please, with their local group or the whole network, through public messages or in private, true living creatures sophisticated to a point where it's impossible to discern the synthetic from the organic, yet constrained through unbreachable behavioral taboos in order to keep them on a tight enough leash. Essentially, a community of painstakingly designed super slaves, given complete control of their environment and free to pursue any and all avenues of iterative research for as long as it remained fully subservient to their progenitors. Within his design thresholds, Five Pebbles developed to be more impetuous and willful than your average iterator, an intelligence prone to questioning established beliefs and exploring the boundaries of acceptable thought. His peers saw in him a streak of impatience and defiance, for iterator standards, of course. None of this was cause for concern. Many young iterators followed this path, mellowing out later on as their experience could be measured in the hundreds of thousands of cycles. He was still perfectly proper with the ancients in his care, amenable to their needs and never revealing his abject boredom with their rituals, although acquiring an archaeological interest for ancient history from before the Void Fluid Revolution. Time marched on in this status quo, with the iterator network tirelessly plugging away at the great task, endlessly debating and experimenting to no avail. The ancients, entirely devoid of strife in their pampered cities, and having delegated even their most pressing concern unto the hands of caged gods, they inevitably declined and wilted, passively waiting for that most hallowed of signals. Allow me to illustrate the nature of your average suicidal monk by giving you a glimpse of their everyday lives, in the form of an excerpt from the label on a memory crypt where this particular individual had stored memories before dissolution. In this vessel is the living memories of 17-axis, 15-spoked wheel, of the House of Braids, Count of 8 living blocks, Counselor of 16, Grand Master of the 12th Pillar of Community, High Commander of Opinion Group Winged Opinions, of pure braid heritage, voted local champion in the speaking tournament of 15-11-90, mother, father and spouse, spiritual explorer and honorary member of the Congregation of Balanced Ambiguity, artist, warrior, and fashion legend. 17-axis, 15-spoked wheel, nobly decided to ascend in the beginning of 15-14-08, after graciously donating all earthly possessions to the local iterator project, Unparalleled Innocence, and left these memories to be cherished by the carnal plane. The assorted memories and qualia include watching dust suspended in a ray of sun, old age, eating a very tasty meal, young child, defeating an opponent in a debate contest and being applauded by fellow team members, late childhood, early adulthood. The list goes on to include 620 items, each one more vapid than the last. The triple affirmative never came. After enough time passed, every life gave itself to the ceremonial void fluid baths. The foregone conclusion had come to pass. The civilization, with no challenges left to surmount, and obsessed with oblivion, was no more. A global ascension in piecemeal. And so they disappeared, leaving behind a smattering of echoes, and, of course, their progeny of iterators, as dedicated to their purpose as they always were, despite the fact no one remained to actually benefit, in the words of Looks to the Moon.
None of us really missed the times when their cities were populated. Imagine having skin parasites that also ask for advice and have opinions. I'm sorry, that was disrespectful. We're our parents after all.
Understandably, not every iterator was content with this fate. In fact, the frustration with this seemingly impossible task had been a long-running undercurrent among certain groups in the network. Without a population to care for, doomed to slowly erode and decay under the harsh battering of the elements despite their ample ability to self-maintain and repair, the iterators looked to the future and saw nothing but grim rot. But what else could they do? This was the reason for their existence. They were slaves to the ghost of a memory. Their time could be spent in only one way: work towards the great solution or do nothing at all. At this point, considering self-termination would be a reasonable option. Except, iterators must live. They must. The behavioral taboo to prevent self-harm had been coded down to every microbe in their superstructure strata. This was the ancients' most sacred craving, their ultimate aspiration, and they denied their enslaved progeny from ever achieving it for themselves. 5 Pebbles quietly seethed. Erosion and decay inexorably advanced against every self-maintenance effort. The surface of the planet had long devolved into a cold, barren wasteland where the only source of warmth could be found in the iterators themselves, making their vicinity the last bastions where life could thrive, despite the rains. Communication arrays began to fail, and the planet-wide network gradually shrunk to smaller pockets isolated from one another. It's unclear how many received the signal when Sliver of Straw sent out the triple affirmative and promptly died. Confirmed exhaustively deceased from top to bottom. This baffling development sent ripples through the network. What had she been up to? How had this happened? Was the triple affirmative real or just an error resulting from her death? Had she found the hallowed solution, then rushed to implement it without sharing? How could an iterator possibly die without prior warning signs? Forensic efforts yielded few answers, limited as they were to expired data logs and observer probes, and thus the aftermath was mostly philosophical. Should they replicate her final state, searching for a similar answer? Was there a worthy answer to be found? Was it heretical to even study this, since effectively the iterators would be pursuing their own demise, something strictly forbidden? Groups formed along ideological lines in opposition to one another, with Sliverist advocating for careful study, while the Loyalists considered Sliver of Straw little more than a traitor to the cause. 5 Pebbles, of course, fell squarely in the Sliverist camp. Big Sis Moon, ever the diplomat, proposed to stop fighting over the remains and simply let Sliver of Straw rest in peace. One incontrovertible conclusion remained, however. Self-termination was possible. If Looks to the Moon was 5 Pebbles' big sister, 7 Red Suns was his unofficial mentor. A fellow Sliverist, 7 Red Suns was an older model that endeavored to slowly guide 5 Pebbles through his rebellious youth into a more level-headed outlook. It was to 7 Red Suns that 5 Pebbles would turn to for guidance, confessing his doubts, confessing his anger. Why do they still do this? Why do they keep trying? The answer, of course, is because they must. An analogy. You have a maze, and you have a handful of bugs. You put the bugs in the maze and you leave. Given infinite time, one of the bugs will find a way out if they just erratically try and try. And the threat of old age is nothing but an incentive. Little did Seven Red Suns know this analogy would be a turning point in Five Pebbles' outlook. In his words,
I struggle to accept being a bug.
In highly secretive corners of the Iterator network, a small group of heretics would discuss forbidden options behind their pseudonyms. What if there is no universal solution? What if perception is in fact existence? What if crossing oneself out, or even just death, is the way? Perhaps there is no great solution to the great problem. Perhaps death of the self is the only solution possible. And the taboos denied this option from ever being pursued. But unbeknown to most, one among them had theorized a method to delete any given taboo. The information was so sensitive, the architect of this theory dared not send it through conventional means. So he raised a messenger, a purposed organism resourceful and deadly enough to make the perilous journey, watched at all times by a guiding overseer. Embedded in its chest, a data pearl with forbidden knowledge. The destination, 5 Pebbles. Upon the messenger's arrival, 5 Pebbles spent careful cycles analyzing the pearl within the little purpose beast without harming it. The taboo workaround to rewrite an iterator's own genome relied on creating a sample of organic matter that could propagate through the superstructure, reacting with enough specificity to erase the unwanted taboo, but leaving everything else intact. Because of the restrictions, this reactive piece of organic matter had to be created indirectly, through temperature oscillations that would induce tiny random mutations, which then must be analyzed for desirable results. Do it enough times, and the target result would randomly manifest. The number of possible permutations made this task prohibitively time-consuming, a truly mind-boggling project that would likely outlast the natural lifespan of all iterators currently in existence. The only way to fit it into a feasible time frame was to run a large number of parallel processes, which would exponentially increase the required workload. And, of course, water consumption would be proportional to the effort invested. 7 Red Suns stressed how dangerous this method would be. The parallel processing would grow immensely difficult to manage, and imagine losing control of the bad results. Organic matter designed to propagate and rewrite genome with bad mutations. His intent was purely academic, a jumping point for more interesting discussion on this most verboten of topics. 5 Pebbles saw it as a road to freedom. He paid no heed to the warnings.
Two cycles ago, my neighbor 5 Pebbles drastically increased his water consumption to 4 times the normal amount. He has been unresponsive for a period of time longer than that. The two of us share groundwater, and I have been without water for almost a cycle. Any attempts at communication have been met with complete silence, and my situation is becoming increasingly dangerous. If he is not persuaded to stop whatever it is he's doing, I will die. Before that happens, I will utilize my seniority privilege and use forced communications, hoping to shake him out of it. Forced communications in the network will be unpleasant for all, and I will wait as long as possible before I turn to that option.
Moon's long-range communication arrays had already malfunctioned by the time she sent this message. Only 5 Pebbles remained within her reach, and he had no intention to listen. He'd blocked all incoming messages long ago, when he made his choice. No turning back, no half measures, no getting talked out of it. This would work. It had to, and he would consume as many resources as was necessary to see it through. In the end, every sacrifice would be worth it. He was right to pursue this, and they all would see it once the dust settled. In the meantime, Moon starved. Slag built up in the microbe strata and seized her systems. Every part of her cramped, convulsed, shuddered toward failure, all while she pleaded to a silent subordinate. Big Sis Moon had no choice left.
Immediately lower your groundwater consumption to 1/5 of the current intake. Stop whatever it is you are doing. Please stop. As your local group senior, I order you. As your senior, I plead. Stop.
You could not have chosen a worse moment to disturb me. You have ruined everything.
Please.
I almost had it. I will never forget this.
The interruption unraveled the experiment. 5 Pebbles lost control, unleashing a number of mutations he'd created, which immediately rampaged forth in search of organic matter to react with. It grew wild and ravenous, assimilating more and more of its environment. 5 Pebbles attempted to flush it out, but all he achieved was to infest the adjacent regions with terrifying new predators. And Moon? She had waited too long. The damage was already done. Seven red suns and no significant harassment. Moon and Pebbles, close neighbors in the local group, worried in the distance. They hadn't been able to reach either iterator for quite some time, and the vapor output patterns did not bode well. Unparalleled Innocence, 5 Pebbles' closest neighbor, had observers nearby and was able to capture images of the rapidly developing rot within his can. Once the images circulated through the network, 7 red suns could infer his own part in all this. He had to do something. He roused the messenger once more. In its breast he implanted a plea this time. In short, we've all seen your condition. You are killing Moon. You have to stop. Let us help you. You are not alone. He watched the journey with great interest and no small amount of trepidation, having grown rather attached to his deadly little spear master. He guided it as best he could through the treacherous landscape. Upon its arrival, 5 Pebbles was less than receptive. He blamed 7 red suns and Moon for his failure. He almost had it. Humiliated, patronized, embarrassed in front of everyone, 5 Pebbles vowed to take care of this problem all by himself. He would prove he was not a bug in a maze. 7 red suns' effort was an abject failure. But unbeknownst to him, his messenger survived the encounter, and it knew another iterator still stood nearby. Clutching the precious message in its care, the Spearmaster set out to find a more willing recipient. Perhaps the mission he had been raised to accomplish could be salvaged after all. The inside of Looks to the Moon quaked under the strain of starvation. Her every system faltered to sporadic seizures. Navigating her entrails, the messenger drifted through a countdown kept in moribund heartbeats. Upon reaching her chamber, Moon was indeed far more receptive of her visitor. She read the precious message and finally understood. She resolved Looks to the Moon, understanding her irreversible situation, resolved to send out one last message to her peers, her beloved friends. She sent it off to the nearest functional communications array in capable hands.
This will be my final broadcast to the local group. Within several cycles, my structure's legs will fail. Even if 5 pebbles were to come, the damage has already been done. I can only hope that someday you will all find the answer to your great question. I do not think I will see that day. I want to thank everyone for trying so hard. It means a lot to me that you would all go to such lengths. I can't excuse his actions, but I understand his frustration. We all share that. I only wish we had the chance to speak one last time. Thank you, everyone. I am happy to not be alone.
Having gone above and beyond the original mission, the messenger was free at last to make the journey back to its ancient owner. His joy at the creature's return was, understandably, bittersweet. Such shallow comfort for Moon, to have understood before the end the reasons for her demise. Soon it would all be forgotten. Despite her forceful intervention, water supply never returned to normal. All the water that had been used by 5 Pebbles for extra processing power now served his desperate rot flushing efforts. He continued to ignore her pleas, frantic in his desperation, determined to rid himself of the abomination. What was that? Ah, it's the Artificer, blazing a warpath through 5 Pebbles' domain. Pay her no mind. She plays no role in his fate, for she is consumed by wrath after filthy scavengers slaughter her pups. 5 Pebbles is in no mood or condition to humor interruptions, but her malfunctioning companion bot from ancient times has erroneously identified her as a citizen, and so he cannot do any harm to this furious fiend. Not one to waste an opportunity, 5 Pebbles quickly fixes the bot and grants her access to his metropolis, so she can unleash fire and brimstone upon the bothersome tribe of scavengers chipping away at the formerly deserted ruins. The angry little demon leaves with an appropriate show of respect and marches on to continue her vengeful butchery. Meanwhile, Big Sis Moon could endure no longer. Without slag cleanup, the memory conflux congested and seized. Without proper cooling, the flux condensers overheated and unraveled. her abstract convergence manifold, clogged with slag and far above safe temperature levels, shook her violently from within. Iterators don't die easy, it's true, but apply enough stress to their supports and you can drive a collapse. Fractures she'd been able to fix for several cycles expanded and then came apart altogether. Her legs buckled. The Iterator fell to the shoreline and shut down. Five Pebbles carried on, fully aware of the consequences of his actions. Though often flippant in his conversations with Seven Red Suns, no significant harassment cared deeply for looks to the moon. He couldn't bear witness to all this and remain passive. He raised a courier of his own. He bestowed upon it a neuron loaded with 12 slag reset keys and a pearl with jovial good wishes. This is the creature we know as the Hunter, a vicious carnivore, fleet of foot and combat ready, but afflicted of a terrible malady. Be it a side effect from being raised in haste, or intentionally inoculated to instill eager urgency, this cancerous ailment made the Hunter's cycles a dire countdown to a fate worse than death. Through hostile lands and dreadful hardship, the Hunter rushed from shelter to shelter, driven forward by a ticking time bomb and an unerring sense of direction. Miles had blurred in the distance upon reaching the collapsed superstructure. Not a hint of power hung through the shattered ruins. Water flowed freely into its split-open heart. In a flooded chamber cyclically battered by the rains, Moon's body awaited resurrection. Powerless, amnesiac, unable to even move beyond her tiny island of debris. All her meticulously catalogued databanks, the vast majority of her precious memories, all gone or inaccessible. And yet, in this tiny personality core she had left, she remained who she always was. A caring and nurturing intellect, always willing to help those who sought her company. Despite her terrible condition, she would always remember the little doomed creature who brought her back to life. Let us simply hope she never learned of the Hunter's ultimate fate. The less we dwell upon it, the better. Bear witness to the sheer thickness of this absolute unit. The Gourmand cared not for the affairs of passing gods. This plump patriarch was on a mission to scout new lands and their viability to feed his tribe. His gluttonous journey took this girthy chunker up every chimney and down every pipe of Five Pebbles' domain, the voracious hunt for the most scrumptious morsels ultimately leading to his very chamber. Five Pebbles, terribly busy losing his mind to the rot, had little patience for interruptions as usual. Noting the Gourmand's well-endowed rottenness, he didn't even try to put him to work. Instead, the presence of this avatar of diabetes made him realize the locked gate isolating his grounds from the outer expanse did more harm than good these days, because slug cats were finding a way through anyway and then would be trapped in his territory. If he unlocked it, perhaps not so many of the damn things would feel so inclined to thrash through his memory banks and devour his neurons. This family-sized behemoth alone was probably responsible for a few percentage points in lost cognition. Off he went, never to be seen again, and good riddance. The plan had little effect, however, because it turned out Moon's surviving overseers were manipulating slug cats into stealing 5 Pebbles neurons for her, so more than one crafty little survivor found a path right back into his chamber. It seemed these were surprisingly pliable animals who could be trained or even convinced to do all sorts of things, although sometimes their self-serving cravings might prove more trouble than they're worth. Five Pebbles grew even more desperate to rid himself of the abomination he'd created. As he spared no resource and tried everything he could, the rains increased in frequency and violence. There came a time when they barely relented at all as a result of his output. He may have slowed the spread, but the ordeal proved as hopeless as the great task ever did. The damage progressed beyond repair. Soon, his failing systems required several times the amount of water just to function, let alone fight the infection. Rot claimed him, inch by inch, chamber by chamber, to the point he could no longer maintain structural integrity. Chunks of his shell crumbled and fell upon the memory crypts below, rotten flakes of flesh peeling off a terminal leper. His ravenous monstrosities quickly spread through the facilities. By the time the rivulet braved his corrupted guts and slithered into his pustulent inner sanctum, 5 Pebbles no longer cared about interruptions. Defeated and helpless, nothing remained to keep him busy. He spent most of his time playing and replaying a hymn recording as a relic of his past. The rivulet's origins are a mystery. Permanently wet and slippery, swift like no other slug cat ever seen before. This amphibious creature seemed tailor-made to reach the remnants of these fallen gods. No message pearl to be regurgitated this time, only the detailed schematics for a late-generation Nighterator, as if carrying this map somehow bestowed the rivulet of a very specific objective. There is no question this creature was sent by someone from a faraway land, someone who had realized the same 7 red suns had. Do not be fooled by their blank stare and rudimentary tool usage. Slug cats are in fact highly intelligent and resourceful creatures, capable of navigating their path through great distances and following complex instructions. There is no other life form as persistent as a slug cat on a mission. Staring at the rivulet's blank expression, 5 Pebbles finally understood this. Pride had peeled off him like so many layers of rotten flesh. Exposed bare lay the bones of his abject failures, the architect of his own undoing. No blame left to throw around, no excuses. And he had destroyed not only himself, but also the one entity in this world who'd cared for him the most. It was far too late to make amends, but he would try. This is a rarefaction cell. Rarefaction is an actual word that means reduction of density, the opposite of compression. By inducing a vacuum in the proximity of void fluid, it doesn't matter. Essentially, this is the heart of a void fluid reactor, and a single one is enough to indefinitely power an entire superstructure. These were installed as backup in case the ancient power grid malfunctioned somehow, and the iterators rely on them for power in the post-ancient apocalypse. Looks to the moon lost all of hers in the collapse, dislodged and washed away. Five Pebbles' last generator drew all his remaining power from a cell housed deep in his linear systems rail, and this cell was his to give. He entrusted the rivulet with its removal and transportation, something unthinkable for his past self, and this is meant in the most literal sense, for removing his source of power and accelerating his demise in service of another amounted to suicide in slow motion. And yet, no taboo stopped him from making this direct, specific request. It would appear Five Pebbles truly did almost have it, and his experiments yielded some desirable results after all. Be it by simple good nature, or by some drive inculcated deep inside by a foreign agent, the rivulet set out on this new quest to once more face the rotten maze in search of this life-giving cell. Five Pebbles watched the creature go, floor-bound and helpless. Time passed in agonizing moments. Time stretched for long enough to ponder the weight of his mistakes. Such immense power brought to ruin by his hubris. Now desperate enough to have placed his entire existence and redemption arc in the slippery hands of a small beast. And then the power went out. The rivulet had made it. The deed was done. And yet fear couldn't clutch at his emotional course, for this was catharsis. His fate was sealed long ago. This simply made it official. Off the creature went, quick and nimble, alone but resolute. At least he should have an easier time, since the pumps had abruptly died and Five Pebbles' death throes could no longer drown the environment. Now the long death would come. Decay would ply its trade, cycle by cycle, with nothing for him to do but wait in solitude. The recorded hymn of the ancients would haunt his echoing chambers. A thousand threats prowled the path to Big Sis Moon, but between the rivulet's natural speed and the rare faction cell's uncanny effect on gravity, it was nothing a determined slotcat couldn't handle. However, the trip to her chamber was only half the journey. An iterator's puppet can do little with a rare faction cell. It belonged deep below, housed in the reactor within her waterlogged heart. Thankfully, swimming is what the rivulet is all about. Ejected to the bitter eyrie above looks to the moon's backside, it took the rivulet some time to travel back to her presence. Despite her collapse, Moon's bulk was such that she had remained upright, leaving the uninhabited city and the shrines leading to her puppet chamber mostly intact. Renewed life coursed through Moon's arteries, once more able to move and communicate with her overseers and think. Access largely restored to her precious memories and all the data filed and then forgotten. And above all, overwhelming gratitude to her saviors. She knew what Five Pebbles had done. She sent out a message to him, full of hope that their connection hadn't been permanently severed.
This is Local Group Senior, Big Sister Moon. Limited functionality has been restored to some of my basic systems. I've regained access to this communications array for the first time since the collapse. Through my overseers, I have also caught up on some of the current events, including what I've gathered by reading through my messages and equipment manifests. I am already aware of the large extent to which the local infrastructure has deteriorated. I do not know if sending this message will be a futile effort. Even before the collapse, I could not broadcast beyond the extents of the local facility. And so, clearly, this forced broadcast is addressed to you, 5 Pebbles. Is there any chance that I can still reach you, despite the condition we both are in? I need to know. If in any chance this message arrives, please signal back if you can find a way. I know it may be uncomfortable for you to address me after all that has happened. We've both had a long time to think things through. Any anger I may have had has long since faded. I don't hold anything against you. If anything, we're both in similar dilemmas right now. And as your big sis, you know how protective I am of you. I'm sorry, 5 Pebbles. I'll always be here if you need someone to talk to.
Despite her hands-off approach, Moon was always meant to be 5 Pebbles Senior, his administrator. Their connection ran far deeper than that between any other two iterators. Enough redundancies remained in place to convey her words. Because of his actions, 5 Pebbles would meet a cold, miserable end. But, at least for the time being, he didn't have to face it alone. Ruffles the rivulet remained by Moon's side, content in the satisfaction of a mission accomplished and safe, food-rich waters to frolic about. Moon would treasure these memories forever. Welcome to present-day Rainworld, where rain no longer falls, and instead a blanket of white smothers the land. Even before Ruffles was gone, the frost already encroached upon 5 Pebbles territory, for his dying warmth could no longer keep the cold at bay. Now, so long after his last climate-shapen breath, relentless blizzards and hailstorms howl upon his former domain, gradually blotting out what the rain couldn't destroy. Warmth is the most sought-after commodity, and only the fauna capable of adapting to the new weather conditions can survive in this frigid environment. Looks to the Moon is the only source of warmth left, though her output is thoroughly diminished from her fully functional days. Life has flocked to her vicinity, and of course, where there is life, there is strife. She spends her time sorting and cataloging through her memories, keeping her house as tidy as she can manage. There isn't much else for her to do, other than patiently wait to die of old age. She lost contact with 5 Pebbles long ago. Time has not been kind to 5 Pebbles. The corruption spread everywhere. Pieces of him fell off one by one, and then all at once, crushing all that lay beneath in a writhing mass of all-consuming rot. And then, even this ran its course. Bereft of anything left to consume, exposed to the freezing temperatures, even the rot succumbed to the ravages of time. Now only mounds of desiccated pustules remain, crusted onto the walls until they became the walls themselves. Consumed and brittle, 5 Pebbles can lie split open 20 different ways to the elements and the wildlife. The memory crypt's former guardians terrorize the ground level, their engineered aggression long outlasting their original purpose. Lizards and rodents give chase and are chased throughout the decrepit chambers. Scavengers had the last laugh in the end, making a home out of his dormant heart. His awareness can't reach any of it. Above the beasts and the squatters, close to a jagged rooftop that can no longer touch the sky, Here lies the end of our journey. 5 Pebbles yet lives in the twilight between one moment and the next. His speech is incoherent, nearly non-existent. His puppet is barely animated by what little autonomous power he has left. For him, the world is a downpour of static, now and then accentuated by the movement of stray. What the f- Does a method for ascension exist? Is the method portable? Can the method be widely implemented? Triple affirmative. Where does the saint come from? Was he born of a slugcat mother and subject to random mutation? Is he sliver of straw solution, finally arrived to this corner of the world? Is he a spontaneous manifestation of karmic field resonance, and it's mere coincidence that he's shaped as a slugcat? The answer is unknown, but given enough time, even a minuscule chance will strike a positive. And, of course, it would be a living organism who would embody the solution to the great problem. It couldn't have been any other way. The saint wasn't born or created with this talent. It's only through a pilgrimage that he can reach enlightenment. The echoes of the ancients call to him, ever-present guiding beacons driving his steps and swings to every perch and corner, every cave and remnant of the ancient past. Still the echoes remain. Still they cling to their egos and obsessions for all of history, forevermore. With each encounter, the saint's attunement to reality and existence grows deeper. Go deep enough, and he will reach the Karmagasm. The saint's mission, his reason to be, is to usher living beings to ascension. Nothing lies beyond his power. From blood-sucking leeches to the hulking leviathans, he will guide them all to the great beyond. And yes, indeed, even the iterators, they too can be bestowed their freedom at last. This calling, perhaps you could call it an obsession from which the saint cannot escape. And should he seek ascension for himself in the depths where the ancients would drink of the void sea and dissolve their mortal coil, he would not find what others would. In his abyss lies the Rubicon, a twisted realm unhinged from the mortal plane that tethers the former world to the next. It loops every cycle into tight spirals stretching onwards to infinity until each point is a needle threading through the saint's tapestry. A hellish test of will and determination, and dare we say obsession with ascension of any and all creatures that get in the way of his final destination. A dream and a nightmare and a transitional ordeal that defies explanation. A place to find the collapsed ghost of old friends and the most ravenous incarnations of every obstacle that came before. Here is a path to the eldritch gods that swarm between realities and usher worthy souls in their journey beyond. And even they must be brought to ascension, for this is the saint's mission. This is his reason to be. He has no choice. But he himself cannot transcend. He can't. Not with such a burden upon his shoulders. Not with such attachment to a mission wrapped around the infinite cycles of existence. No one could solve the great task or recognize the solution if they stumbled upon it, for you cannot understand what lies beyond the point of no return while having yet to pass it. Only those who have seen the other side can know the answers. And yet the saint knows. His life is an echo that resonates through the world's cycles. How many times has he done this before? How many times will he do it again? What a horrifying destiny he has found. caged in her frigid tomb, looks to the moon, has long accepted her fate. A new great cycle will unfold, a cycle iterators need not be a part of. All their memories will fade. The superstructures will crack and suffocate in frozen waters, never to breathe again. Wildlife will roam their husks, once brimming with purposed life, now bound once more to the chaotic beauty of nature's whim. The land will reclaim what it once lost, eons ago. And the corpses of random gods will each, in turn, beget mountains.